Hello everyone! We're due for a giant monster movie review, so let's tackle one I've had on my to-do list for a couple years, 1961 or 1962's Reptilicus. This Danish-American co-production, Denmark's first science fiction film, was produced by Sidney Pink from a concept by Pink adapted into a screenplay by Ib Melchior. A few years ago, I read about the making of Reptilicus in Ib Melchior, Man of Imagination, a biography of Melchior by visual effects artist and film historian Robert Skotak. I was eager to check the film out after reading about it, but I made myself wait until the details faded from my brain so I could watch it fresh. Reptilicus is widely considered a bad movie. Whether it strays into so bad it's good territory is, of course, in the eye of the beholder. But when people talk about it, I don't always know which cut they're referring to. Since the American version is more prevalent outside of Denmark, maybe it's safe to assume that's the one. However, after much hemming and hawing, I decided to start with the Danish version, which at 92 minutes is 11 minutes longer than the American version. I figured if I watched the longer one first, it would be easier to detect the changes. And then I had to figure out how to organize this review. But I've decided the best way to do it is to discuss the movies as I experienced them. I'll share my impressions of the Danish version, and then what I thought of the American version, and then we'll talk about the production. As far as the plot goes, the two movies are pretty much identical. In Lapland, a team of engineers is stunned when their drill pulls a bloody chunk of animal tissue out of the ground. They dig up what appears to be part of a large prehistoric creature's tail. They put it on ice and bring it to an aquarium in Copenhagen for analysis. When it's accidentally allowed to thaw overnight, scientists are shocked to find the tissue healing itself. A massive scaled animal they name Reptilicus begins regenerating, facilitated by the aquarium's dumb decision to feed it nutrients. And then one night during a thunderstorm, Reptilicus breaks out. This is an okay movie. I wasn't sure what to expect, but despite its terrible reputation, I did find it entertaining, which is more than I can say for some other infamously bad monster movies. It's got some fun to it, it keeps things moving, and it's more competently made than some of its fellow clunkers. It's got a surprisingly large number of characters. There's the professor, a friendly and loyal man with a good sense of humor, who is the affectionate father of two pretty daughters, Lisa and Karen. The younger one, Karen, who flounces around like a child, sets her heart on the young engineer, Sven, who found the chunk, and he eventually gives in to her advances. There's a lady sent by the UN, and when the professor and his elder daughter compliment her appearance, she bristles and primly reminds them that she is there on serious business, but when the daughter continues to admire her stylish clothes, she softens. This was odd. Both she and the daughter Lisa seem to be interested in Grayson, the blustery American brigadier general who shows up, although I don't know why. He's a grim workaholic who makes it no secret he resents being on this assignment. His all-work and no-play attitude leads to some culture clash. Apparently, the Danish are a fun-loving people who don't take anything too seriously, so they find his American go in and get things done approach amusing. I'm not sure Grayson is aware that he's in a half-hearted, so-called love triangle. He shows both ladies an equal amount of tepid interest, and it doesn't lead anywhere, at least that I could see. And then there's Mikkelsen. Mikkelsen is the comic relief, the odd jobs man and night watchman at the aquarium, who's basically the Jar Jar Binks of Reptilicus. He's dopey, he's annoying, and he could easily be cut out of the movie. And yet his goofiness is kind of endearing. One of the biggest but weirdest delights of watching Reptilicus was experiencing Mikkelsen's completely random musical number. It's like one of those non-sequitur musical scenes in a Showa-era Godzilla movie, or that The Words Get Stuck in My Throat song from War of the Gargantuas. Out of the blue, he sings about the scary monster Reptilicus with these children, and it's bewildering, but it's one of the highlights of the movie. There's another song later on. Reptilicus is taking its sweet time regenerating, and instead of doing a time jump, the movie sends the characters on vacation. We get some charming but irrelevant tourism scenes, including a stop at a nightclub where singer Berta Wilke performs a song about Tivoli. Tivoli Gardens is the world-famous amusement park in Copenhagen. The Danish music score, composed by Sven Gildmark, likes to keep you guessing. Sometimes it's epic, sometimes it's spooky, and sometimes it's comical. And my mom and I had to giggle when they show an establishing shot of the US Embassy and the music does a riff on the Star-Spangled Banner. As for Reptilicus itself, once it breaks out, we catch glimpses of tail and flank, we see a foot go through the roof of a farmhouse, and we're shown the aftermath of a livestock attack. There's a lot of teasing until we finally do see it, and it seems to be a pretty well-made puppet. Though there's not much to it, it does the trick for this stage of the movie, and it's unlike any other movie monsters of its time. But you start to notice it does an awful lot of flailing. Its movements are jerky, restricted by the design, and the more you see of it, the derpier it looks. Also, it's mentioned during its development that Reptilicus has 2 bat-like wings. That's a little detail you store in the back of your mind until at last... oh dear, that's pretty rough. Unfortunately, I experienced a severe drop in interest in the movie after this point. Everyone's just waiting while Reptilicus flies around Europe, terrorizing Germany, Sweden, etc., so we hear, but then it conveniently comes back so they can confront it again. Shortly after it arrives, its wings are torn, so it's grounded again. That's lame. And then the movie doesn't really pull out anything new in the last act. There's nothing to up the stakes. No mutation, no new location. The climactic conflict is the one you knew from the beginning they were going to have to face. As soon as you learn the monster is able to fully regenerate, you should be aware of the quandary they're going to be in. If they blow the monster up into 1,000,000 pieces, they're going to end up with 1,000,000 Reptilicuses. Reptilici? But this is something the trigger-happy general has to have spelled out for him. Not once, but twice. Did he not already understand this? And then after they explained it to him the first time, did he forget? I found the movie a mixed bag. Sometimes it wants to be serious, but other times it wants to be lighthearted and whimsical, and that mishmash gives it an unbalanced feeling. Plus, while the characters are likable enough, at least some of them, their subplots aren't particularly enticing or developed. And the monster, well, it looks better than I'd been led to expect, and it's better on film than in stills, but it's still not very good. Such are my comments on the Danish version of Reptilicus. A few days later, I watched the American version, which you can find in excellent quality on YouTube or the Internet Archive. The quality is better than my DVD copy of the Danish version. There were many instances where I thought, that shot wasn't in the other version, was it? Or was it there, but it just didn't look as good? I'd have to play the 2 films side by side to know for sure, but I think the American version did have a number of extra inserts, and some of them are pretty gross. It's important to note that these 2 versions of Reptilicus were shot simultaneously. Each scene that contained dialogue was performed in both Danish and English, which I think is impressive, especially considering some of the actors weren't comfortable in the foreign language. I often found it hard to tell who was speaking their own lines on camera, who was dubbing their own lines in post, and who was being dubbed by someone else. And that relative smoothness is also impressive. There were some elements added: first-person narration from General Grayson, a bombastic title drop, an awful shot of Reptilicus eating a farmer, and bright green acid slime. At first I wasn't sure if this was the monster's blood or some kind of venom, but I figured it out. The slime adds visual interest and dials up the danger for any people around, although it does look cartoonish, and I was bummed that we never got a hint of what it does to its victims. With this version being only 81 minutes long, obviously some things were removed. They took out the scene between the professor's daughters, the scene of Sven and Karen flirting on the beach, the scene of them on vacation, and any material with Lisa expressing interest in the general. They took out the line about Sven having 1 month's leave, which is good because I found that distracting in the Danish version when he continues to hang around well beyond that and nobody addresses it. And they removed the line where the professor refers to Dr. Dalby as his trusted friend in whose care they can safely leave Reptilicus, even though he's the one who got them into this mess by leaving the door open and falling asleep. Speaking of that scene, I didn't like that in this version, the editing makes it seem like the portion of Reptilicus's tail is imbued with special powers from the storm or something, and opens the freezer door by itself. The Danish cut was more natural, although this was kind of funny, so I'll give it that. And I also admit that, for some reason, in English, the idea of the friction from the drill in the beginning causing the flesh to thaw in the ground seemed more ridiculous. I don't know why that is, why it makes a difference to me, that in one version I heard it, and in the other version I just read it on the screen, but hearing it, it sounded stupider. Mikkelsen's name is changed to Peterson, and he's somehow even stranger in this version. He does all the same absurd things, but maybe being dubbed makes him seem even more out of place. I had wondered if they'd cut any of his scenes, but no, they're still there. Except for his Reptilicus song. They kept the Tivoli song, but they cut his musical number, and that... I enjoyed that random scene more than all of his other scenes combined. And yet that is the one bit of his nonsense they cut. What? And you know, another thing they cut is the Star-Spangled Banner cue. And I kind of missed that. Another oddity, the UN lady, whose name is Connie Miller, has been recast. Marla Behrens was brought in to replace Bodil Miller, although she still appears briefly in the very next scene, which is awkward. I don't know the reason for the replacement. I don't know if Bodil Miller objected to speaking the English lines. I looked her up and she did come to Hollywood for a period in the 1950s, so she did speak English. So I don't know the story behind that, and I don't know if both actresses were there the whole time and they would just swap them out. Okay, we're going to do the Danish scene, we'll have you come up, now we're going to do the American version of it, so... or if they were forced to go back and do reshoots, because her dialogue just didn't come out right or something, I don't know. But I will say, my mom and I both felt that the new actress, Marla Behrens, was more interesting and expressive. She seemed a better fit, and made the character appear more developed, even though she wasn't. One of the best changes is that close-ups of Reptilicus' head are now in slow motion. It looks decent, makes the monster seem larger and more ominous, and the movement less floppy. It did give me more time to notice some of the quirkier aspects of the design, though. The tufts of hair, the Fu Manchu strings, the way the forefeet just stick out. Another change? No more flying. I suddenly realized, hey, they never mentioned the wings. Is it going to be a surprise in this version? Like, they think they've got him cordoned off in the water, and then suddenly, whoosh! He comes shooting up and flies away, and they're all shocked? That would actually be pretty awesome. But no, they just cut the flying completely, and while it seems a shame, considering how much it probably cost to shoot that footage, I don't mind, because it looked terrible, and that section of the movie dragged. Something that changed for me is that I disliked General Grayson even more the second time around. Carl Ottosson brings no charm to the role, and his acting is lackluster. I think this was easier to take in the Danish version, where you could put it down to his character being a foreigner, out of his element, and not speaking his native tongue. But either way, Grayson is a blockhead. I don't like him from the start, I never warm up to him, and as a military leader, he doesn't instill confidence. He can't get it through his thick skull that this thing regenerates. It's obvious what that means, but he's still determined to blow it to smithereens, and his stubbornness makes him infuriating. After watching the American version, I had some questions. How did we get here? What was the process like? Why is Reptilicus the way it is? And why did they make some of these huge changes? Having watched the two versions and judged them for myself, I got out my book to consult it, and here's what I gathered. On the heels of the success of 1959's The Angry Red Planet, which I reviewed back in 2017, producer Sidney Pink wanted to make 2 more science fiction films to be distributed by American International Pictures, and he wanted to direct these himself. He came up with a couple basic ideas and reunited with screenwriter/director Ib Melchior to develop them into screenplays, which became Reptilicus and 1962's Journey to the Seventh Planet, which I reviewed in 2021. Pink later claimed that he wrote the script, but while the main concept was Pink's, the regeneration and the frozen chunk were Melchior's ideas. He did extensive research on regeneration in lizards, starfish, and worms to ensure the premise was credible. He liked that this element, coupled with the creature's ability to adapt, essentially made it immortal, as implied by the twist ending where its severed foot begins moving in the water. There's a great description of the monster in the screenplay which indicates what Melchior envisioned. In the center of the meadow, Reptilicus is drawing himself up to his full gigantic height, and for the first time the men see the hellish, noisome creature they are hunting. Reptilicus is nearly full-grown, towering 80 feet into the air. His body is long and slender, almost evilly snake-like, with a long, pliable tail. He's covered with huge, overlapping, bony scales. Big tufts of coarse, black hair stick out from between the scales, especially around the neck. The rear legs on which he stands are sturdy and squat. His forelegs are grotesquely small, but with long, sharp, cruel claws. From his sides sprout a pair of huge, long, tapering wings, almost like giant bat wings, not as yet developed enough for flight. They are folded against his sides. On his long neck sits a hellish abomination, the head of Reptilicus. His head seems to be a deformed cross between the ugly, triangular head of a rattlesnake and the malicious features of a vampire bat. Huge, slit-pupiled eyes gleam coldly and cruelly, venom-dripping fangs menace from the slimy, gaping maw, and bony, scaly protuberances give the whole misbegotten creature a savage, demoniac appearance. The monster roars with rage. The film was set to shoot in Denmark, and Melchior, being Danish himself, was an ideal choice to write it. Not only was he able to do both scripts himself and incorporate national culture and landmarks, his name alone persuaded many of the Danish cast and crew to join a production that was way out of their comfort zone. The two versions were shot simultaneously across 3 months, Danish scenes directed by Paul Bang and English scenes directed by Sid Pink. But both films had the same cinematographer, Danish DP Oa Viltrup. It was Viltrup who independently shot many inserts that give the film extra oomph, and it was Viltrup who photographed the attack sequences. Many in the cast and crew grew exasperated with Pink's inexperience, his vague criticisms, and his frequent absences. But Pink isn't solely to blame for how the movie turned out. The Danish technicians doing the special effects just weren't used to this kind of production. They didn't make movies like this in Denmark, and unlike their American or Japanese counterparts, they didn't have the experience or the equipment, and since they didn't have proper funding either, the miniatures of the city ended up cheap and flimsy. They went big on scenes of people panicking, but while the number of extras is astonishing and the drawbridge scene is neat, the special sequence isn't quite all it was intended to be. And while Viltrup meant for any frames showing the wires that operated the Reptilicus marionette to be removed by trimming the footage down to 2 or 3 second clips, the editor for the final cut used all of his footage, wires included. It's no wonder that the initial American cut, as presented by Sid Pink, was infamously deemed not releasable by AIP. They called Melchior in to work with Anthony Karas and fix it. They cut the flying scenes, trimmed most other shots of the monster, slowed down the footage, adjusted the focus to hide the wires, added smoke and fire and green slime to make it seem like the humans and the monster really were in the same place. They also added the shot of the farmer being devoured, the farmer played by Melchior's own teenaged stepson. Skotak describes this as, quote, a shot best not lingered on. They did all this, plus redubbed some, most, all of the dialogue on a minuscule post-production budget, and finally, in November 1962, the film was released in the United States. At the time, Sid Pink praised Melchior and seemed glad to collaborate with him, but years later, he turned on him, blaming Melchior instead of owning that he was out of his depth as a first-time director, and crediting Melchior for turning his ideas into full-fledged movies and transforming Reptilicus into a product AIP was willing to release. Fortunately, Melchior made several other fine science fiction films of his own that prove his talent and creativity as both a screenwriter and a director. I've reviewed 3 of them: Planet of the Vampires, The Time Travelers, and Robinson Crusoe on Mars, and I've put links to these videos in the description. I may not have included quite so much backstory in this review, except I think it provides a lot of valuable insight into this production, what was intended versus what went wrong, and why the 2 versions have some significant differences. Reptilicus may be considered the giant claw's Danish cousin, and I mean that in multiple ways, but I don't think either version of it is as bad as some people say. It avoids some of the pitfalls that similar low-budget sci-fi horror flicks fall into, conveying neither total ineptitude nor bloated self-indulgence. I asked my mom which one she liked better, and she promptly said the American version, and I think I tend to agree. The AIP cut removes some of the worst elements and streamlines the movie while keeping and even improving some of the good moments. While it's not a great monster flick no matter how you slice it, it has some things going for it, and I can totally understand why both versions have a cult following. I hope you enjoyed this review. In the description you can find links to both versions of the movie and to other related videos of mine if you'd like to check those out. Let me know what you think of Reptilicus if you've seen it in the comments below. I look forward to hearing what you all have to say about this one, and I'll be back next week with another review. Thanks for watching.